record button. Now we're recording. And so we do share the recordings of these gatherings. This one, as you see on the slide, is the topic of engaging with governments. And I've invited our dear friend, Jeff Thindwa from the World Bank to join us for this discussion. It's going to be a very much of a co-creation meeting today because our regional coordinators from Africa and Latin America really asked that we dive into this subject, because even though our members have a lot of wisdom and experience, they felt sharing it amongst ourselves and really distilling some principles would be a great thing to do this morning. And Anne is going to be walking us through that in just a few minutes. Then we're also going to discuss some advocacy action that is underway right now. As you know, the UN General Assembly is underway. World Bank meetings are coming up. World Food Day is coming up. All kinds of things are coming up. So we have some very specific action for the movement that's going on right now. And then we'll announce the times and theme for our next month's meeting. So as you know, we stand with her, basically. The whole reason for this movement is that people living in poverty are systematically excluded from having a real voice in the decisions that affect their lives. And that is a fundamental human right. It's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And community-led development is the best methodology we know to make that a reality. We have 5 goals. The first being that voice and agency for women, youth, and marginalized groups. The second is adequate community finance. If communities have no fair share of public resources, there's only so far they can go in their own leading their own development. Good local governance, and by that we mean transparency and democracy and citizen engagement. And if you have those 3 things, hopefully communities have proven that they have the wisdom and the skill to really achieve quality public services, which is another human right, and are able to work together to become resilient. And as we know, that is the big challenge of our era, is for communities to really become resilient, because resilience is fundamentally a community attribute. When there's a crisis, when there's a problem, it's community members themselves who are always the first responders. We are currently in the midst of 11 days for community-led development, and we'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but I'm going to stop sharing. And I'd like to introduce Jeff. And I specifically invited Jeff because he leads an organization, the Global Partnership for Social Accountability, which has had a real shift in the context of how they see citizen engagement with government. So I thought it would be really helpful to hear Jeff talk about that a bit. And then we'll pass it to Anne, who's going to walk us through sort of our collective process together. So Jeff, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, John and Ganjan and all your colleagues in the movement for community-led development. I'm honored to be invited to your meeting. I also thank you for recognizing the work that we do in the Global Partnership for Social Accountability. All of you have been champions, and my wish is that we can find ways to operationalize this partnership in one way or another. So we need to keep interacting. And John, you've been a real champion of this work. One of the problems in my country, in Malawi, was that the Ministry of Education, which was supplying teaching and learning materials to to schools discovered that the materials were being siphoned off. There was serious leakage in the delivery chain, and a vast percentage of the materials were not getting to their destinations, to the schools in the localities. Civil society organizations in Malawi were very concerned about that crisis. When the GPSA announced made a call for proposals, the Malawi Economic Justice Network and CARE International, actually, they collaborated. They presented a proposal that was aimed at dealing with this crisis. So they collaborated with the planning unit of the Ministry of Education of Malawi. And the story here is that for all the quality control systems in government that were in place, administrative procedures, public procurement procedures, policies and procedures. Malawi has very robust public policy framework, public procurement framework. There were just accountability systems of government that were working. They were supposed to have caught that, and they did not. What the Malawi Economic Justice Network did, and it has right now, I think, a membership of about 100 civil society organizations. They mobilized parent and teachers associations. They mobilized local community groups, women's guilds, youth organizations, and teachers themselves used local participatory mechanisms, focus group discussions, in addition to a system that they devised for tracking the very delivery of those teaching and learning materials. In addition to that, they focused on the public procurement process itself upstream, where they monitored the compliance of the procurement process and the conduct of the firms that had been awarded contracts. And so the tracking system was put into gear, and local groups would monitor the arrival of teaching and learning materials, cross-check, compare what has been allocated versus what has arrived. The trucks that had been delivering these books were notorious for arriving anytime without notice. They would come at midnight. Who delivers books in a village in Malawi at midnight? And offload these books. The headmaster colluding, or whoever is colluding, they receive those books and there is no accountability, no serious cross-checking and record keeping. And that was one of the factors in the loss of these materials. Malawi has a burgeoning private sector education industry, let me put it that way. These schools are just mushrooming, and people were taking from public education to sell to private schools. Well, the long and short of it is, after 4 years of this program, the loss of these materials was cut by 85%. And the planning unit of the Ministry of Education was saying, the systems that we have, supply side quality control, obviously need to be complemented by local people, by communities, by parent and teachers associations, and by civil society organizations working together. There's no way the Ministry of Education could have managed to protect these materials from loss in and of its own. In Mozambique, that's a serious crisis of access to basic health care, especially for mothers. Maternal and child health was, perhaps still is, in crisis. When the GPSA, and also, by the way, serious issues with HIV/AIDS in these communities in Nyasa province and Zambezia province. The GPSA work was led by Care Universal, which is now United Purpose. My memory is failing this morning. United Purpose, they changed their names. And they used these public auditoriums where communities interacted with public officials and expressed their issues and needs and would prioritize what their needs are. And several years into the program, the health centers in one district, the government, in response to community feedback, built health centers in Ethiopia district and a maternity center in Mua district in Zambezia province. They allocated female midwives, which helped increase the institutional births. I think from an average of 2 deliveries a month to 42 monthly deliveries in one center. And all of these, I mean, the 2 stories are illustrating one profound reality, which is that development ultimately is a collaboration of local communities who own their own destiny, who need to take charge of public resources, who need to assertively engage public authorities and be aware of their entitlements and hold governments to account. So the model of the GPSA is ultimately focused on, are we bringing solutions to the table? Now, we know that in civil society, there's a variety, it's a rich tapestry of types of organizations. No one is better than another. There are those who feel that if government has become intransigent, they go to the streets and they march and they protest. I have joined protests on the streets myself. So for all the talk about collaboration, I've done it. And I think there's a place for that. But what the World Bank is doing is mediating a collaborative space, because what is at stake are real solutions to real development problems. We can't bring all of the tools of civil society to bear on every one of the problems we're trying to address. We have to say which are the tools that are suited to solving this particular problem. So we are in the business of fostering, facilitating, and funding co-creation of solutions to development problems by civil society and government. But I want to end by saying this. What we are also chasing in the GPSA is the notion that, yes, this plethora of civil society self-standing social accountability efforts, rich and important and powerful as it is, we are arguing that actually if we can get governments to integrate in its own delivery systems these good practices of the Malawi Economic Justice Network, of United Purpose, to become a part of their business model. So social accountability becomes not something that's always government is doing under pressure from civil society, but embraces as a way of functioning. That these lessons and practices of social accountability can find their pathways to scale and institutionalization, so that long after the CSOs have left the scene, we have governments that are actually practicing good social accountability processes. Let me stop there.
Wonderful, Jeff. That is exactly sets the stage for the co-creation that we want to do today, because as you mentioned, there's a lot of tools. And I know friendship is one of the most important tools, and I deeply value our friendship. It was 5 p.m. yesterday that I heard from Jeff that he was making himself available to join us today. Also, this GPSA is quite an innovative thing, because there had never before been a mechanism for funding civil society from the World Bank budget. So I really, and Jeff has spearheaded that, and it's been happening. And I think, as he says, that very definition of governance as a partnership between citizens' own associations, which, by the way, Jeff, I don't think ever should leave. I think citizens everywhere should stay organized in their communities and forever work with government, because as I've noticed, governments kind of change from time to time.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for setting our stage. And now I want to introduce Anne, who's going to walk us through kind of our collaborative process here. Anne? Oops.
Sorry, a little break back there. Hi, everyone. And Jeff, that was great. Thank you so much. And I look forward to more comments from you, because what I am going to say is just along the lines of what you're talking about. So can you all see my screen then?
Yes.
Okay, so we're here to talk about how domestic civil society should engage with government. And of course, we are always bringing it back to the anchor of community-led development. And Jeff, you have done a perfect introduction. So I'm going to offer just a quick sort of summary of some key points, many of which came from GPSA and probably Jeff himself. So don't be surprised if you see yourself in here, Jeff. Civil society and government relations are evolving. So with decentralization and devolution, there's more of a government presence, which is opening up a lot more opportunities for community-led development, because there's a local government to interface with, like in the example of Malawi. And then, as you mentioned, Jeff, a lot of it is moving from contentious to collaborative, and the only contentious mode, generated a lot of hubbub, but it didn't always result in change. However, also to your point, there's still a role for the watchdogs, and there still is a role for the protests. But as part of what you called the rich tapestry of organizations and ways that different organizations do their civil society thing. Some of the key concepts that are really coming out and that are informing the work of our national chapters are social accountability, obviously, transparency, collective action, collaborative governance, gender and inclusion in there, and systems change for the purpose of creating a virtuous cycle. Can you hear me okay? Is there some?
Yeah, if you're not speaking, if you could please mute. We're getting some background noise from somebody somewhere.
Or from the cosmos supporting our work here. Government and civil society, the relationships are evolving, but the biggest barriers that go in both directions, I think, are the mindset barrier of mistrust and competition, a lot of it based on history of contention, and then also just competitive mindset of, that's our job, or no, that's our job, or you're not doing your job. There's also gaps in intentional relationships and connections. We're going to talk more about that today. Government bureaucracies move slower, obviously, by the nature of their beast, and civil society moves faster often, and so trying to calibrate those paces of change is actually a positive thing, but it can result in a certain amount of frustration. And also civil society and democracy are still nascent in many countries, a lot of which you could trace back to the colonial roots. So civil society really has a lot of growth potential in a lot of places, but still is not as rich a tapestry as it should be. Other barriers include the idea that international actors are often dominating the landscape. The civil society organizations are looking to the international NGOs or international organizations, and so are the governments, which may be precluding them from actually interacting as much as they should with each other. There's a lack of successful experience to build on, which is why it's great that the GPSA has so many wonderful case studies with very specific and understandable examples, like you gave two of, Jeff, and your website is full of those. So it's really good food for thought there. And then that also goes to this lack of access to case studies and guidance. A lot of those case studies and guidance are out there, but they're not getting to the domestic civil society groups as much as they should, and we want to help get them there. So then the question is, I just wonder if anyone wants to chime in at this point. Are there other things that you see that are hindering effective collaboration between civil societies and governments? Feel free to unmute yourself and offer any ideas if you'd like to.
If I, this is Barry Shelley, I'll turn on my video.
Thanks.
Just one thing that comes to mind is that in terms of barriers, it seems to me that in my experience, what I often see is that there are civil society actors that really embrace the concept of community-led development. I think probably are genuinely committed to it. But then when they engage either with the communities or with governments, the concept of leadership is not collective. So the leadership that we're, the concept of leadership that pervades through our societies, and I think this is true just about everywhere, is still one of the strong leader that has to really take charge and take the reins of things, which then, I mean, initiative on the part of leadership can often be really important. And I'm not trying to say that there's never a role for strong initiative on the part of leaders, but I think that often gets in the way of real community-led development, both on the ground, but also in terms of relationships with governments and multilateral organizations, et cetera. So I'm not quite sure how to word that as a, well, I would just say, I think there's the concept of leadership itself that is not as collective as I think probably is needed for community-led development can be a barrier itself.
Thank you. Very interesting. And Bev or Etienne, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you haven't seen, they just came out with a new book on systems leaders, which is kind of speaks a little bit to what you just mentioned. Do you have any comments, Bev or Etienne?
For me, I had a thought that's probably a naive thought, but I'm not sure all governments want this kind of collaboration.
Yeah.
It may not be welcome. I don't know.
Yes. And that's something we're going to talk about in a little bit with the mental models or the mindsets, because with that kind of mental model or mindset, it's really hard to make progress. Gunjan, I see your
But
hand.
I'm not sure it's just mindset. It's just that maybe they have a lot to hide, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
It may be that they understand the mindset, but they are interests at play that work against that. I don't know.
Maybe that's where the watchdogs come in, right?
Well, the other thing, and I once had an opportunity to ask this question of Graça Michel, and she was saying that there's that a lot of governments are frankly new at being governments and are feeling very insecure, and that insecurity and fear is a real, they want to reinforces that kind of approach to leadership that was just referred to as not collaborative, just out of fear and insecurity.
Nice. Gunjan and then Bev.
Thanks, Anne. I don't see Chad here from One Village Partners, but we were having a very interesting conversation when we released, when we released the CLD assessment tool, where working with governments is an important dimension of doing CLD. And what he said, and what a lot of people actually subsequently have pointed out, that the challenge is that the government isn't a monolith, right? It's not like one homogeneous entity that's out there that you are interacting with, and you kind of establish the rules of collaboration, and and it's all done. It's not as neat and straightforward as that. The challenge is, when you work with local governments, in most governments around the world, local governments, there is a rapid turnover. There is a rapid turnover with bureaucrats who you have to. So you spend a lot of time and energy working out with bureaucrats who are there at that point, what's going to happen next, what the next steps would be, how you would work together. And then suddenly overnight, the person is transferred out. And the new person who comes in is either not interested, doesn't care, doesn't know. It could be any of these things, or it could be somebody who is the supporter and understands, which is great. But what that means is that you need to again go through the cycle of constantly engaging and building that appetite for partnership and working together. And that requires a huge amount of resources to be constantly doing that, because that's not part of the system. That's not something, as somebody who's been a part of the government, that's not something you're taught as a bureaucracy, right? When you're in the bureaucracy, that, well, you have to do this. So there is that thing of just the process that takes place in government. Yeah, that's
Awesome. And also that speaks to longer term systems change, because often when those people switch jobs, they're still in the area and you never know where you're going to come across them again, right? That's several great points there. Okay, thank you, Gunjan. Bev, what about you?
Well, I'm actually also like Etienne, I'm a bit embarrassed to put my hand up because I feel a bit naive in terms of talking about CSOs, but I was just thinking back to my time of working employed by the World Bank, but working with public accounts committees in Southern Africa and Eastern Africa. And there at the meetings of these public accounts committees, where we often had the Supreme Audit Institution there, we often had representatives from the media, and there was always somebody from civil society organization who was invited to come and speak. And the format was always the same. Didn't matter what we tried to do, make the format different, but somebody from the civil society organization would come and speak to the Public Accounts Committee in the form of a presentation about what they were doing, and then receive questions and answers. And I mean, maybe we didn't do enough to help, but it always occurred to me that it would have been wonderful to have had somebody there who was standing up and saying, giving some kind of, I don't know, some call, a convening call, we call it. What is the value of working in partnership with us? Talk about that, right? Where are the substantial boundaries that are getting in the way? What could we do together that we can't do separately? We, as in the government or public accounts committees and Supreme Audit institutions. So there were, it just felt like here was an opportunity for a conversation that always simply got lost in a PowerPoint presentation and questions and answers. It's a very small thing, but it's an opportunity that often felt like it was being missed.
Yes, keep that in mind when we talk about principles, because I feel like you've got some principles in there, like that have to do with engaging in dialogue versus taking turns talking at each other. And also, like you said, the space to make that happen. Thanks so much. Any other comments before I move on? Or feel free to type in the chat as well. Okay, so let's talk about emergent learning. What is working in terms of collaboration between civil society and government? Well, one big thing is that governments and domestic civil society and the links between the two are keys to sustainable development. Of course, the third piece there is the private sector, but we're not talking about private sector today because we're focusing on this. But it's not just, we're always having to make the case for civil society in and of itself, but then it's the links between civil society and government that is one more of those intangible things that can really be critical to sustainable development. There's a lesson that says that social accountability is most effective when linked to public sector reform. There's more about that from GPSA. There's the idea of right fit versus best practice, because as we know, every community and context is different. So what fits right in one place might not fit right in the other place. So the civil society organizations that want to adopt ideas or models that worked other places, they need the capacities to pick and choose what they think will work well in their setting, and whatever kind of technical support and Jeff, as you said, the whatever fostering, facilitating, and funding can help make that happen. More emergent learning is broad-based economic and political inclusion is foundational to stability and democracy. And again, that's one of those things where if you can make the case to some government people that it's in their interest to foster this broad-based inclusion, it might actually help, assuming that they are pro-stability and democracy. Initial positive actions are a great strong start, but then it needs to be followed by adaptive learning and continued attention. And that's why things that are too short or too time limited that end without kind of any sustainability might just peter back into nothing after some progress may have been made. And that leads to the next point, which is a focus on incremental change that is fueled by continuous positive momentum over many years. So to your point, well, to several of your points, you need a pipeline of leaders. You need a continuous effort to connect with whoever the new civil servant is. You can't just say, oh, we had it all in place and then people left or changed jobs, because that's always going to happen. And also, it's bit by bit, and sometimes the little bits might not seem like much, but if you're looking over the long term and watching slow progress, a lot of great efforts, like Indonesia is a great example, a lot of progress made there over the course of 20 years of specific reform programs. And then also practical systems change tools are critical. And this includes water systems change, which we're going to talk about. The collective impact 3.0 approach, which we use with our national chapters, which is evidence-based, and also systems convening guidance. You can see here, this is Bev and Etienne's new book, where they are pulling out the ideas that come with a different form of leadership that is not that strongman form of leadership that Barry mentioned earlier. And what does it look like? And I will say, since Pascal is on the call, Pascal is featured in the book, as well as several other people from our national chapters. And Bev and Etienne, I think the book is amazing because you really, so much of what systems leaders do, they do it kind of behind the scenes and in a quiet way and in a over long-term way. And that's a little harder to see than the person shouting up in front of the whole big group. And then also, if you don't know it, WACSI, West Africa Civil Society Institution, has a lot of good things around civil society taking systemic approaches. Yeah, so those are just some of the top line lessons. And I think it gives us a lot to work with. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, move on. And we're going to talk about today's co-creation challenge. We're going to go into small groups in a minute. And one of the things that makes CLD a little bit different than some other approaches is that it is a values-based approach. And if you took the values out of CLD, you wouldn't have CLD left. It is inherently always connected to its values. And then the trick is to build it out from the values into guiding principles. So I think we all know what values are, but then guiding principles are how you combine your values with your strategy to guide practical action. And one of the reasons that people ask for this topic on this call is because civil society organizations everywhere are trying to figure out what should they do tomorrow in terms of interacting with the government. And so guiding principles is always a good way to go. So just for the sake of making it clear, because you're going to have to invent your own principles in a few minutes, here's a few examples of values and principles. So if the value is, I believe every human being is sacred, the principle would be, I treat each person I meet with respect. If the value is, every human being has unique potential, the principle is, ensure all people in the community have a chance to contribute to community-led development efforts. And if the value is, when people meaningfully connect, surprising things can happen and you never know when. The principle is, get to know all kinds of people, for example, government staff people, even if you don't have an immediate purpose. And, but at the same time, it's not like you're, just always thinking how you're going to use people. It's that belief in the power of meaningful human connection, and just letting that emerge when the time is right. So in these breakout groups we're going to go into, you're going to be tasked with generating a few guiding principles that would be designed to help civil society effectively engage with government at all levels. I love the comment, Gunjan. Government is not a monolith. And even if one part of the government is terrible, gosh knows we've all experienced this with our own governments. The post office is great, but the, whatever, the fire structure in your neighborhood has got problems. It's not a monolith. So, and ideally with community-led development, a lot of the focus is on local government, but we do a lot of work at the national level as well, trying to get the enabling environment in place for community-led development. So when you go into your small groups, there's no right or wrong. So just put your ideas out there. A guiding principle often begins with a verb. It's a rule of thumb, and it can be specific or general if it just rings true to you. You can link with and build on your own values, and specifically to the values of community-led development. You can take a screenshot of the next 2 pages for use in your breakout group, or we'll put the link to the slides in the chat. And if Gunjan or someone wouldn't mind putting the link to the slides in the chat, because you're going to have a little bit of a model you're working from. Jump right in. I've been in too many breakout groups where we spend the first 2 minutes looking at each other, wondering who's going to talk first. And if someone could take notes of the 1 to 3 principles that you come up with, that would be great. Okay, so to give you a little more guidance on what the principles are supposed to be about, we're going to use this framework called the Water of Systems Change. Again, one of Pascal's favorite tools, and they use it in Benin all the time, and we use it all over the world. So simple, yet so sophisticated. So the idea is that when you are trying to work on systems change, a lot of the most important work happens sort of not at the level of policies, practice, and resource flows. That's the goal level. But it happens with regards to relationships and connections, power dynamics, both of which are semi-explicit, and then the mental models, which are implicit. And that's where the transformative change comes from, looking at those mindsets and mental models. And as we heard earlier in the call, they could be really a big issue to contend with. So we're going to ask you to come up with 1 to 3 principles in your group or more that have to do with any one of these 3 categories. And just to make it easier, because I used to be a teacher, I'm going to give you some examples, but you can't copy the examples. Okay, so in the one group, mental models and mindsets, the question is, what guiding principles can civil society actors use to understand and improve mental models? And some sample principles are: recognize that mental models are at the heart of systems change, seek to understand mental models in place that may be helping or hindering collaboration between government and civil society, and create dialogue, to Bev's point, with key actors about these issues to create shared understanding and to learn more. The next category you could create a guiding principle under is relationships and connections. What guiding principles would relate to this? So here's a few samples. Build sincere human relationships with all kinds of people. Be honest and open and look for points of connection. See relationship building as a long-term effort. And you may meet someone who's some job in government, And we've all, if you've been in a career long enough, you know, you come across people sometimes 10 years later, and it's just amazing. And if you had a good connection 10 years before, even because you had lunch together or something, that's a great starting point to reestablish your relationship, because you find yourself together again in some new dynamic. And also, don't use or manipulate people. And you're not building relationships with them so you can get things out of them. You're building relationships with them from a values point of view, because you're all humans trying to find your shared understanding of what you're trying to do to make your society better. So using and manipulating also will come back to you. So another good reason not to do it. The third one is the power dynamics. So a sample principle here is listen carefully and regularly to diverse representatives of the communities you are representing. Because as we all know, from a power dynamics point of view, their voices are the voices that are most likely to be left out. And if you are adhering to the values of community-led development, you want to make sure that their voices are not being left out. So that is all. Now we can go into these breakout groups, and you can come up with your 1 to 3 principles. Before we break into groups, does anyone have a question? And do we have, oh, thanks, it's in the chat so you can see. So we'll try and get 20 minutes in the breakout groups, and then we'll come back and be prepared to read out your guiding principles that you have developed. And we're going to gather them all, and this is going to be the start of some materials that we want to share across our national chapters. So your work is going to go farther than today. Okay, any guidance, Gunjan?
No, I think that's perfect. The breakout rooms are ready. There are about 6 to 7 people per breakout room. And I believe everybody is self-facilitating, right? The groups are self-facilitated.
Yes. So self-facilitate in the spirit of community-led development and systems convening, and also self-note take. Make sure someone's taking notes. Thank you, Gunjan.
Okay, you'll all see a message pop up in your screen in just about a second. Just accept it, join the room, and you're all set. And if you don't see the pop-up message, let me know and I will help you.
Oh, I guess hosts don't get the pop-up message, do we?
Yes, I can't put you in a group, but you can choose to go to any group you want, John. You can hop if you want.
But I don't see. Oh, let's see. Oh, I see. I can just click the little thing and then join one.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Jude, are you having trouble finding your group?
no, I'll just. I was just going to pick one without one of our staff in it, but.
I was asking Jude, but yes, please. John, you may want to go to.
Oh,
yes. I'm finding it difficult due to network connectivity.
Ah, okay. All right. I'm going to try again, Jude, and see if I can get you into your room. John, you want to go to room 4? That has a few people there.
Okay. I don't see. Oh, wait a minute. There it is. Join.
Jude, did you get a message to join? Jude, did you get a pop-up? Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good discussion.
Okay, here we are back.
People are just
Welcome
coming
back,
in.
everybody. Okay, so we have a few minutes left to report out. So let's go around, and Ben is taking notes. Thank you, Ben, and I'll also take notes too. Maybe we can just go group by group and hear what your principles are, and feel free to qualify them if you would like. So who would like to go first? Let's see. Let me just call on somebody. Barry, who's speaking up for your group?
I'm the one who volunteered to take notes, so I guess that's me. Well, we had I think a really good discussion. I want to start with the last comment that was made, and we ran out of time, so I'm still not absolutely clear. But Elina, is that right? Pointed out and gave an example of that civil society organizations often work in sort of isolation, and that there may be projects. And I wasn't quite clear if she was suggesting that the government was involved and then stepped out or stepped back too far in implementation stage, but that her principle was that the governments need to be engaged at all levels at all times in these kind of projects. The other discussion that we had to do with power dynamics, and essentially the value. We talked about various ways of expressing that, but one way of putting it was that the value is we should not be naive about power relations between civil society organizations and communities, and on one hand, and governments, and that there's a real frequency and possibility of being co-opted in those kind of relationships. And so while on one hand we want to build relationships, we shouldn't be naive about that. And the principle would then be that we really always need to be attentive to and supportive of communities and civil society organizations in developing the organizational and leadership capacity to be able to build a power base, to be able to collaborate more equally with governments and other multilateral institutions or other kinds of agencies. So those are the two things that we primarily discussed.
Wow, those are incredible. Thank you so much. Who would like to go next? Who else was a note taker or the speak out person? Okay, Neil, please.
Sure. So we created 3 values to drive our principles: inclusion, acknowledgement, and acceptance. And under inclusion, our principle was including marginalized groups and ensuring that power dynamics are taken into account in communication frameworks. People are listened to via constructive dialogue, and ensure that available resources to be shared are recognized. Under acknowledgement, we had take into consideration the cultural knowledge and wisdom of community leaders and elders, recognize and build upon existing capacities within a community, and ensure government groups and civil society groups recognize each other's strengths and capacities and realize the symbiotic relationship between civil society and government. And under acceptance, we had recognized that not all parts of the project and not all values of organizations will be shared by the community.
Wow, that was great. Wow, you really accomplished a lot. Thank you. Okay, who's next? Oh, thanks for typing those in there too. Very nice. We'll copy those.
Anya's next.
Yes.
Okay,
So
Anya.
we discussed to always adapt and maintain good communication between actors. So I think John mentioned the idea of keeping like a good list where we have an actual updated list of where people are in different organizations. We touched on the idea of engaging youth early on and finding ways to also integrate traditional and non-traditional actors to make sure that we're always keeping kind of a diversity in approaches. And towards the end, we also talked about keeping or ensuring that information is actually accessible. So particularly for people who might not have access to the internet or similar modes of communication. And I think that was about it that we discussed. Anyone feel free to jump in if I missed anything.
That's great,
Thank you.
Anya.
Awesome. Anya, thank you so much. Okay, who's next? Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, yes. So in our breakout room, so me and Christiane, we also had Jude, we had Francis, we had Ian, we had Anima, and I thought it was a very productive breakout room. So the first thing we went over was just the idea of getting a better in-depth understanding of people's like mindsets and like their mentalities toward the past. And specifically, we went over how in rural communities, a lot of times people might tend to have just a focus on the past and what they've done in the past instead of actively looking to the future. And so like using the mental model in that scenario, it was very important to changing their way of thinking and showing them how they can think about like developing themselves and actually like escaping any like impoverished conditions they might be in. After that, we went into talking about more about relationships and trust and connections. Essentially, and what we went over, which I found very interesting, is that a lot of times like CSOs will start out by just getting to know the people in the community. They won't even like start out at all like saying, okay, we're going to help develop your technical skills. We're going to support you in XYZ endeavor. Instead, they start to build a relationship. And in doing that, it makes it so much easier to actively work with them down the road. And it's especially true considering that a lot of CSOs and communities will not really work with people outside of their own network. So getting to know them first and getting within their network first is like an absolute imperative if we want to actually promote development throughout the world. Then lastly, we went over things about power dynamics, specifically related to empowerment, just about how it's critical to empower community members to be the ones who actually guide like the goals or outcomes of CLD programs, and how we shouldn't just leave it to national governments to dictate a broad, just blanket policy to throw out just around the entire country. And yeah, I thought this was just really, like, considering all these values is really important to actively promoting community-led development and ensuring that we're not just living in the past, we're not failing to like engage with other organizations, and that people are the ones actually leading the policies.
Awesome. Ben, thank you so much. What a great report out. Okay, who would like to go next?
And we had 4 groups, so I think all the 4 groups are done.
Oh, is that all the groups?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the groups.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you, Gunjan. Good with the breakout room
No,
math there.
I can take it back whenever you're ready, Ann.
What? Yes,
Yeah,
okay. Is there any final comments that anyone wants to share? Okay, we will be gathering these and disseminating them, so look forward to the next version. And thank you so much to everyone for helping to co-create them.
Great, and thanks for structuring this so well. That was really useful. So I'm going to throw up slides because I have a number of requests for us. Let's see if I remember. Okay. So we are in the midst of 11 days for community-led development again. Sarah, anything you want to say about it briefly, how people can support this effort?
Sure, that would be great. So this is the second time we're launching the 11 days for community-led development. The first time was in January, and this time it's in the lead up to the dissemination of phase 2 of our collaborative research, which I'm sure Gunjan will talk about shortly. So leading up to the event on October 6th, we're trying to showcase the conditions in which community-led development thrives, So we've collected quotes on the impact of community-led development from our chapters, from different organizations and movement members, and we've been highlighting those posts. We started on Monday. This is the third day. The theme today is accountability. So look out for our posts on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And it's also not too late to send me a quote if you would like to participate. I'll drop my email in the chat.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. Okay, now here's my big ask. So we are heading into October. It'll be October on Friday. And during the week of October 11th, there are a whole series of important days: International Day of the Girl, International Day for Rural Women, International Day for Reduction of Poverty, and World Food Day. USAID, I believe the world's largest bilateral donor, is launching their new food security strategy, and we in the U.S. civil society and everybody around the world can participate. We want to do a week of social media communications with the hashtag End Hunger, and little video messages from anybody who wants to record one, like 30 seconds, 40 seconds, sort of Instagram size, TikTok size videos, with the message, to end hunger, we are rising to the challenge, and then pick one of these three challenges: climate change, COVID-19, or nutrition. So it'd be great to hear, you know, a farmer saying, you know, to end hunger, we're rising to the challenge of climate change by planting fast-growing vegetables, or, you know, whatever people are doing. But we really want to, as USAID launches their strategy, we really want USAID to pay attention to us, to what civil society is doing around the world to promote good nutrition and sustainable community-led farm systems. So that's a campaign. I'll be emailing more of it out. And then we're leading into the big climate change conference, which I think is going to happen, although there's a big civil society push to delay it. I don't think that's going to happen. So next month at our monthly call, we're really going to look at what civil society is doing around climate activism for both mitigation and adaptation. So the sector dialogues, a lot of you have been on our sector dialogues. They are going so great. There's one tomorrow morning on access to justice. If you can find details on the website. And in October, there will be two more. So you'll get information about those. But I've been really inspired by how well these sector dialogues have been going. The community health one yesterday, the recording will soon be up, I take it. And it was really excellent. And then at the culmination of 11 days is the big reveal of the research findings. And Gunjan, could you talk about this event?
Yes, thank you. And I think I have been putting in nuggets into the chat box, even during this call about research findings. But, you know, as some of you may know, in January, we revealed the research findings from phase 1. And we also said, well, we are in the process of phase 2, because in phase 1, we looked at, well, what are we doing when we see we are doing community-led development? How are we doing community-led development? What does it mean to us? In this phase, we began to answer the question which a lot of people have been asking us, and I'm sure you've been asked this question also time and again. Why should we do community-led development? What is the impact of community-led development? So we looked at 56 programs across 32 countries in a rapid realist review to understand how, why, and under what circumstances does community leadership and facilitation lead to improved equity, resilience, and food security. And on October 6th, we are going to launch and share the findings of these reports. We have Ambassador Donald Steinberg, who is the expert advisor to USAID Administrator Samantha Powell on localization. He will be delivering a keynote address and sharing some key, sharing what USAID is planning next on its localization agenda. So it is a wonderful opportunity to directly hear from him, the person who's in charge of the localization agenda at USAID, their plans and where they're going there with it next. We'll have the research team sharing findings. We're going to have Susan Wong, who leads the community-driven development practice at the World Bank, respond to those. And then we're going to have CEOs and thought leaders and influencers, including government people from different countries, come in and issue a call to action. It's a two-part event. It's bilingual, English and French. So Annette, colleagues from DRC can absolutely join in. And we'll have simultaneous translation. We're going to start and then we are going to go on into a deep dive session. So please register. I think we will have, Sarah is going to put in the link for registration into the chat box.
Oh, actually, I just also put it on the screen. So we created a nice little bit.ly that you can just share with people of bit.ly local means. And if you put that in your browser, you'll get to the registration. But we want like a zillion people on this call. We had a zillion people when President Joyce Banda spoke with phase 1. And we want even more zillions of people on this call. So if you have access, and Ambassador Steinberg really wants to be in communication with community organizations. And so our national chapters often have access to lists of civil society networks in their country. I know Pascal is in touch with more than 1,000 organizations. And so please invite them and to register for this call. We really want a great community level turnout for this call. Okay, thanks Gunjan. And so our next call is, like always, the last Wednesday, same time of October, and that'll be just before the big climate change conference starts. So we want to really have a narrative going into that of what communities are doing to address this challenge. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just see if anyone has any last word for everyone. We're almost at time up, and I really want to thank everyone for their participation today. It was, I learned a lot in my group, and it was great hearing from all the other groups and from Jeff and from Bev and Etienne. So thank you all for making this. We will, as Anne said, we'll be distilling this into a document to share and get more input from the national chapters and have as a tool for our national chapters.
Yeah, I have a quick ask announcement.
Please go.
Whatever you want to call it. So actually two. One, we mentioned the sector dialogues. The sector dialogues are again designed to look at CLD in that particular, how it applies in that particular space, examples, obstacles, what can we do next? They're very action oriented. They're spaces for co-creation. So the next sector dialogues coming up are tomorrow, of course, is access to justice, which is fully planned, but we are planning out the education and the climate sector dialogues. So if you are working in these areas, if you have best practices to share, if you have questions, obstacles, problems that you have encountered that you would like us to brainstorm on, if you have ideas on what we can collectively do next to promote CLD in those sectors, then please reach out to us. We want to make sure that we co-create the dialogue spaces with you. So that was one ask. And the second ask is just reiterating what John said, that this is the first time when USAID has actually said to us that they are coming to the meeting, not because really they were interested in so much in our research, but they're coming to the meeting because they want to directly be able to communicate with local civil society organizations, that they want to have a chance to share some of their ideas directly with them. And that will give us an opportunity, a never before opportunity, to engage and influence the localization agenda. So please help us as we seek to ensure that we actually have that influence and we can create that engagement. So, and if you have any questions, reach out to us. If you don't have, for whatever reason, the invite, if you've missed it, if there's anything else, just reach out to us. We are here to listen and we are here to work with you. Thank you.
Great, Gunjan. And we have an easy collective email, info@mcld.org. That gets to all, Anne, Sarah, me, Gunjan, all at the same time. So we're easy to reach. And with that, if everyone wants to unmute and say goodbye to everybody, then we can say goodbye to each other.
Bye, everyone.
Okay,
Bye,
bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. All the best.
Bye.
Okay, good.
So good.